Most good discoveries, Tommy, are accidental.
Sorry, Tommy, you're a bit soft still, huh?
Oh, is it? Should I come close? Is that better?
No.
Yeah, can you still raise your volume more? Because you're still a bit soft, Prof.
Okay.
I'll put all of you behind the banner. 你可以帮我去这个。我现在想的是去这个，对，我好像去它会那个出现2个音哦。
Roslyn, I've lost all of you.
Then 这个 allow me to copy to SD.
I think so, Tommy. I think the book thing is on it. I also have lost everybody.
I can't see all of you.
Oh, not now, huh? She's controlling her.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Put the upside down.
I think because people cannot see themselves, suddenly
We can see just the book thing.
Yeah.
Nothing else.
Yeah. My colleague is has taken over controlling the screen now.
Tommy, you want to tell us why it's an accidental book, or will you tell us afterwards?
I'll tell you afterwards.
Okay.
如果他还没有按过来，因为你还没有按过来。Are you all ready?
Yeah. Everyone ready? We are going to go live already.
Okay.
Oh yeah, it's 1:30. We are going live.
Okay, 1, 2, 3, 1.
Okay.
Are we live? Hello. Hi. Good afternoon, everybody. If you're on Facebook watching us, thanks very much for spending some time with us. And welcome to this afternoon's show. This is basically the Singapore Book Fair online. It's a special event that we're prepared. This afternoon, we are going to have a panel discussion to discuss Professor Tommy Koh's latest book, 50 Secrets of Singapore's Success. Prof. Koh is he edited this book. Is a collection of 50 essays. And joining us virtually from their respective living rooms, Prof. Koh, the editor, and three others who are basically essayists. 50 people contributed essays to this volume. So 3 of them are joining us today. So they are Professor Tommy Koh. We have Mathews, who's from the Institute of Policy Studies. We have Dr. Kalwanjit Soin, who needs no introduction, former NMP, very active in Aware. She wrote a chapter on empowerment of women. And Vikram Khanna, my colleague, who's written something on fiscal sustainability. So just to sort of introduce people to the book, they may not know very much about this lovely volume. Professor Tommy Koh, could you tell us about, how did this book come about and how did you pick the 50 ingredients that make up for Singapore's success?
No, I think I should tell you the story about how I came to edit the book.
Okay.
I owe this book to Mexico and Finland. The story is this. Sometime in the middle of last year, a group of 28 university students came to visit Singapore, and they spent a week studying Singapore. Before they returned to Mexico, the Embassy of Mexico asked whether I could meet them for an hour. The reason they asked me is that I was Singapore's first ambassador to Mexico. So I was very happy to meet the student, very bright kids. And we had a very lively hour-long dialogue, at the end of which one of the students asked me, she said, "Prof, so what's the secret of Singapore's success?" And I said, "It's not one secret, many secrets." Then she asked me, "Can you please write a book about it?" I said, "I don't think I can write a book about it, but let me think about it." And sometimes happy coincidences happen. A little after meeting the Mexican student, the ambassador of Finland gave me this book. "100 Social Innovations from Finland." I had not realized that Finland had invented so many social institutions and practices. And this book, which was published in 2016, has been translated into over 30 languages and is an international bestseller. So having read this book, it gave me courage that if a book on Finland's 100 social innovations has been so popular, maybe a book on 50 secrets of Singapore's success would also be popular. So that gave me courage to try. The next thing I had to do is to sit down and say, how would I divide the essays in the book into different chapters? And I came up with 9 chapters. And then I had to decide which are the 50 most important success stories of Singapore. And the third thing I had to do is to look for 50 friends I know. You ask if the 50 friends would oblige me by each writing a short essay for me. I'm happy to report that almost all of my friends obliged me. And so I managed to get this book done in under 6 months.
Wow, that's amazing.
So that's the sort.
So, Prof, I noticed when you picked the various ingredients, you picked some, fairly more obvious ones, but you also picked things like hawker centers, and even our toilets. Those are quite unusual. Can you share your thinking behind why you picked some of those more quirky aspects of Singapore?
Toilet should not be regarded as quirky. Water and sanitation are 2 of the most important human rights in the world. And it is a shame that billions of people in the world today still have no access to clean drinking water. And even more billions of people have no access to modern sanitation. So the fact that in Singapore, you can drink the water from the tap is a great achievement. The fact that we have flush toilets is another great achievement. And I decided to include toilets in the book. And of course, I asked Mr. Toilet himself, Jack Sim, to write the story.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Okay, maybe we start with Vikram. You wrote a chapter on fiscal sustainability. Can you explain how that's one of the factors for Singapore's success?
Yes, well, thank you, Hoong, and hello, everybody. It seems a bit strange to be talking about fiscal sustainability and fiscal prudence. Actually, fiscal prudence is the title of the chapter. It seems to be a bit strange to talk about it at this time when we've just had the biggest budget blowout in our history, and we're going to run a budget deficit of something like close to $40 billion. That's about 8% of GDP, which we've never had before. But I think that makes it even more relevant. I mean, to ask the big question as to how is it that we're able to afford this? How is it that we're able to pump in so much money? And, how is it that we built up the resources to enable us to do this? And this is what this chapter essentially is about. Now, it's a very long story that goes back 50 years, more than 50 years. Part of it is that we've had high growth for most of those years, more than 10% from 1965 to 75, and then about 6.5% between 76 and 2018. So it's been a high growth 50 years by and large. And that has enabled revenues to be buoyant, unemployment to be low, and expenditure to be controlled. But I think the main element of the story, at least the way I saw it, was that Singapore has designed policies to be sustainable long term. I've given three examples of this. One is its policy towards public enterprises. Now, as many of you probably know, I mean, all over the world, public sector enterprises have been a drain on government budgets throughout the developing world. This is true across Asia, across Africa, across Latin America. Singapore had a certain policy towards its public enterprises, where it parked them under a holding company, Temasek, and the enterprises were basically expected to operate on commercial terms. And that is what has happened, by and large, happened. I mean, so you have, DBS Bank, Keppel, Singapore Airlines, Singtel. They're listed, they compete internationally, they're profitable, they have been profitable. Singapore Airlines, until just this year, has been profitable. So that is one element. The second element is the way we've designed our pension system, which is built around the CPF. Now, the CPF, as you know, is a defined contribution plan. What you end up being paid is a function of what you and your employer have put in throughout your working life. Now, this is in contrast to many other countries where the pension systems are based on defined benefits. Now, defined benefits means a guaranteed benefit when you retire. Now, the trouble is that those guarantees haven't worked out in practice. What has often happened is that the companies providing those guarantees have gone insolvent, or that because of aging and because people are living longer, the amount of benefits that are needed is far exceeds the amount of contributions. So a lot of the public pension plans have remained underfunded, and the governments have had to step in. Now, of course, avoided this by its defined contribution plan. So that's another example. The third example is healthcare. I mean, we have a hybrid system where we partly self-funded through Medisave and co-payments, and partly through public support, through subsidies, targeted subsidies, as well as catastrophic illness cover through Medishield Life and so on. As a result of this, we achieved better outcomes in terms of healthcare than most countries in the OECD. We spent only less than 3% of our GDP on health, whereas the average for the OECD is close to 9%, and the United States spends 17% of GDP on healthcare. So we achieve better outcomes by spending a fraction of what other countries spend. So those are the three big pillars of expenditure, which drain a lot of resources in other countries, which we managed to control. Then on the revenue side, we don't have oil, we don't have natural resources, so we don't depend on a single commodity for our revenues, as many other countries do, including some of our neighbors, for example. So Singapore has a quite diversified economy. We have, corporate tax and GST, which cover about 45% of our revenue, and 57% comes from 12 other taxes, at least 12 other taxes. You have property tax, you have COE, foreign worker levies, sin taxes, and so on. On top of that, we have net investment returns from our sovereign wealth funds, GIC and Temasek, as well as the MAS. So it's a pretty diversified revenue base that we have. That's enabled us to keep our tax rates low, and for personal tax, and 17% for corporate tax. Finally, we have very conservative budgeting practices. We do not include land sales in our revenues, which is what the IMF recommends that you do. We also do not include all investment earnings in our revenue. And finally, we have constitutional safeguards, where if we have to draw on past reserves, as we are doing now, we have to take permission from the president, and we have to balance the budget over the term of the government. So these are the broad elements of the story that has enabled fiscal sustainability, and I think it's especially important at this time when we are faced with fiscal pressures. So that's basically the main ideas in the chapter.
Thanks very much, Vikram, for that summary of what you wrote about in the chapter. There are now about 900 of you joining us, watching this on Facebook Live. Thanks for spending time on this event. Just for the sake of those who may be slightly late joining in, we're discussing Professor Tommy Koh's book, 50 Secrets of Singapore's Success. Yes, Prof, you wanted to say something.
I want to add to Vikram's excellent elucidation that there are two very important values involved, and these are thrift and frugality. From the beginning of independent Singapore, when we were still relatively poor. Our founding father insisted that we should live within our means and that we should put away a little surplus every year. We've done this consistently for over 50 years, and the result is we have an enormous amount of reserves.
Okay, thanks for that, Prof. I am so tempted. I think I will just weigh in on this issue about fiscal fiscal prudence. Prof, you said that actually Singapore has been living within its means. I just want to play devil's advocate and point out that actually our primary budget has been in deficit for quite many years now, and we are able to balance our overall budget only because we resort to using the NIRC, the net investment returns contribution. In other words, we are actually actively tapping on the interest from past reserves in order to pay for our expenditures. Is that really, frugality and thrift that you talk about, or are we actually beginning to sort of, become, I would not say profligate, but become a bit loose in our budgeting? What do you say, Vikram and Prof? And I welcome comments also from Mathew and Dr. Soin.
Well, sorry, go ahead, Tommy.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I mean, I think every country runs deficits from time to time. We have had deficits for 9 times out of the last 20 years. I mean, the point is, so that does not imply imprudence. What happens is that in good years, we use the deficits basically to tide over the economy during bad years. But in good years, we ensure we have surpluses, and we ensure that those surpluses are basically put back into the reserves. And we have no borrowings. Whatever we borrow is invested, and the returns on those investments far exceed the cost. I mean, the cost of repayment. So I think it's been, by and large, a prudent story. The idea is the idea is to sort of have a fiscal sustainability over a long term. It's not a short term thing. As for investment returns, it's very normal. I mean, this is a part of budgeting that all countries do, and we are very, very prudent. We only include half of expected investment returns, long-term investment returns, in our revenues, whereas the IMF recommends that we should include the whole lot, but we don't, because we want to spread the burden across generations. We want to budget for future generations as well. So it's a pretty prudent story all around. I think the fact that there have been deficits and all should not distract us from the fact that overall, over the 50 years, we've built up reserves and we have enough to draw on when we need it, like now.
Thanks for that. Prof. Ko?
Nothing to add.
Can I add something?
Yes.
Please. First, hello, everybody. And before I go to this point, the essay in the book was written together with Miss Margaret Thomas and me. Now, coming to this point, Hoong, that you have raised, one of the reasons that our budget doesn't balance is because, as Vikram pointed out, land sales are not put into our revenue. And if land sales were put into our revenue, I think our budget would be more likely to be balanced than go into deficit.
Okay. Yeah, so this is a good juncture, Dr. Soin. You want to tell us a bit more about the chapter you wrote in the book with Margaret Thomas on empowerment of women and how that has been a factor underpinning Singapore's success?
Okay, this story started once upon a time, well, actually in the 50s, when the struggle for the empowerment of girls and women started in Singapore in the 50s. At that time, girls and women had very little education. Polygamy was rife. The only roles for women were that of a wife, a mother, and a homemaker. Therefore, some women activists in Singapore at that time, including Shireen Foster, they started to promote monogamy and women's rights. Singapore was moving towards internal self-government under the leadership of David Marshall and Lim Yew Hock. The People's Action Party, surprisingly, was then an opposition party, and it was campaigning to become the party in power. And some of the people in the party, which included Madam Chan Choi Siong, they were pushing to make women's rights a cornerstone of the PAP's manifesto. These women in the party, they got together with the women activists I alluded to earlier, and they worked on a progressive piece of legislation called the Women's Charter. Now we know that the PAP then came into power in 1959, but we sometimes forget it was with the help of the women's vote. Now in September 1961, the Women's Charter became law and the PAP fulfilled its promise. Now this was a very important advance in social legislation for the advancement of women, not only in Singapore, but in the whole of Southeast Asia. Now the other factors. In the 60s, female literacy rate was less than 35% as compared to 70% for men. Universal education under the PAP government gave access to both boys and girls to school and especially benefited girls. Also, Singapore's economy began to grow in the 60s and 70s, and women became a vital economic resource as the nation needed all hands on board, including women who were encouraged to go into the low manufacturing. We have to remember, opportunities for women's education and employment were motivated by economic pragmatism and not by the aim of promoting the equality. And this was noted by Professor Chan Heng Chi in 1975. Now, another development that was inadvertently instrumental in promoting gender equality was fertility policy. As the total fertility rate was very high in the 60s, the government had to control population growth. Family planning policies were put into place, including abortion, which was legalized in 1970. This inadvertently gave women some autonomy over their bodies. In 1972, the two-child policy was introduced. This policy was epitomized by the slogan, "Girl or boy, two is enough." This challenged the prevailing patriarchal belief that boys were better than girls, and social attitudes began to shift and have continued to shift until we are at the present time.
Thanks for that, Dr. Soin. Sorry, you want to go on?
No, that's fine. I think that's all I have to say for the introduction.
Thanks very much. And for all of you who are watching live, I want to encourage you to send in your questions. Just type it in. And just we have some happy news. We'll be giving away 2 copies of this book to the folks who asked what we consider the most interesting, the best questions later on. Will be decided by the panel later. So please do your keyboard warrior thing and send in the questions. Okay, let's hear from Mathews on the chapter. Sorry? Oh, sorry. Okay. So Dr. Soin, maybe we can engage Dr. Soin a little bit longer on gender equality issues. I was just wondering, in your chapter, you mentioned something about how there's a possible tension between gender equality and economic growth. Could you say a little bit more about how you see that happening?
Well, the tension is because women, if women are allowed to have complete equality, I think this is going to contribute to economic growth. I mean, this is the opposite of the tension. In fact, a recent study by McKinsey has shown that working towards gender equality in 2025 is going to add $25 billion to the GDP, or 5% of the GDP from business as usual. So gender equality, in fact, it helps economic growth. It's not. There's no tension. The tension is because women have not only got to work in the workplace in the paid employment sector, but because they're overburdened by the care economy at home of looking after children, of looking after older people, and this is the unpaid care economy. And this is not counted in the overall GDP. So
Right.
that's...
Okay. I was just wondering with the circuit breaker, and many people all around the world now working from home, there's likely to be a higher division of chores between the genders. And I'm also just wondering, whether that might actually lead to a revaluation of domestic work. Do you see that happening post-COVID? Do you see any impact on gender equality issues?
Yes and no. I think there is some hope that as men do more housework and childcare, there will be more bonding between the fathers and the children, and that after the COVID-19 situation, the fathers will share much more in the housework. But at the same time, on the negative side, if you see homes who have helpers, foreign helpers, and that is 50% of the private homes and only 15% of HDB apartments. So homes who don't have domestic help, the mothers there and the women there are going to be overburdened because of gender roles. Women are expected to do the housework. Women are expected to look after, to see that children do their homework. And on top of that, now they'll have to cook an additional meal in the afternoon for everybody in the family. And then if you look at families that are single parent families, the burden is going to be higher. If you look at sandwich families, where there is a child under the age of 12 and older people over the age of 65, because of lack of childcare and because elderly people cannot be sent to daycare, the women in those homes are going to be even burdened even more than ever.
Okay.
I mean, I could say more, but I think, we want to, hear other views.
Okay. Yes, welcome back, Mathew. So, could you tell us a bit more about the chapter that you wrote in the book and the role of race and racial harmony in Singapore's success factors?
Sorry, Hoong, for getting out just now, and I think my internet line is not stable, so unfortunately, I hope it is clear at this point of time.
It will be.
All right.
So far.
Okay. My chapter is about racial and religious harmony, and but I think it speaks broadly to the way we deal with differences. That includes local and foreign relations, for instance, which I think has quite a bit of relevance now. I start off with a quote from the UN Special Rapporteur on Contemporary Forms of Racism, where in his 2011 report, sometime back, but he said the peaceful coexistence of the diverse communities in Singapore is a remarkable achievement. And it certainly is the case if we look at tensions in countries in our region where race and religious differences account for considerable social friction. What you see really in Singapore is an anomaly, considering that there has been tension in the past because of our diversity, and the fact that our diversity is only increasing more and more now with immigration. We are a lot more culturally diverse. So having set this up, the chapter looks at how this achievement came about. The bottom line of it is really this, that there have been policies which have well managed this issue. And of course, Singaporeans have responded well to such management. You will not find many countries where government policy has taken such an interest in the management of cultural diversity. At the core of this management is the ideology of multiracialism, where there is equality among the races, and it is very counter the inherent tendency for ethnic chauvinism, where one group is privileged. And this is intentionally checked by policy. So despite the fact that we have a 25% Chinese majority in our country, the cultural rights of the main ethnic groups here have been preserved. So just think about national holidays, for instance. If it's by proportion, you'd expect many more holidays for the Chinese culture, but you don't have that. So also multiracialism has meant that different ethnic groups are represented, whether it's in parliament, to the GRC system, the presidency. So my chapter deals with that. It also deals with the fact that of policies which some people consider very intrusive, whether that's the Sedition Act, the Internal Security Act, Maintenance of Religious Harmony Act. Really, these are measures where the state apparatus is used to dish out punishments on those who, for instance, hurt racial feelings. Also, there are policies which are quite intrusive when you think about, the regulation of public discourse on issues on race and religion. It's very, very carefully curated. And these are things that external observers have taken issue with Singapore, and the fact that we are prioritizing harmony building rather than the freedom of expression. So you can think of other intrusive policies in that dimension. Think about ethnic integration policies. You're forced to coexist with people who are different. Think about IRCC's interracial religious confidence circles. Again, it seems to be unnatural. Religious community leaders seemingly cajoled to meet and work together for harmony. So here in the Singapore model, there's quite a bit of intentionality here. You don't leave things for just organic, everybody liking each other, but rather the fact is there's a recognition that people inherently prefer to stay in isolated communities. And if you don't use some kind of state force, then there'll be no way that we will be able to build the kind of harmonious relationship.
Could I quarrel, Mathew?
Sure.
Quarrel. Yes, Prof, you have a question.
Yeah, I think our success in maintaining racial and religious harmony is one of our most important success stories. I want to quarrel with Mathew when he said our religious leaders are cajoled into appearing together. You know, he's wrong.
I was going to reframe it later.
Yeah, he's wrong. The Interreligious Organization was a grassroots organization, a bottom-up organization, and it was formed in the 1950s, predated independent Singapore. It was not a state-directed institution. That's why I included it in my book.
Yes, it's one of the factors.
Yeah, it's a great success story. The other thing I want to say to Mathew is that our policy of integrating the races in our schools, in our housing board homes, in national service, have bonded people. You know, over time, if you ask my children's generation, how do they feel about themselves? Do they see themselves as Singaporeans or Chinese Singaporean? They'll say they see themselves as Singaporean, plain and simple. You know, and this success story is reflected in the percentage of interracial marriage, which in my time was 5%. It now exceeds 25%. You know, so it's a living reality. You know,
Mathew, a quick response.
We should all be very proud of this.
And we are, and I think Singaporeans recognize that we have achieved quite a bit of harmonious relationship. But I think then the question is, does the state need to play such a role? Prof, you mentioned that IRO was set up years ago, and that's correct. But when the IRO was set up, it was like-minded people who were happy to come together to speak about interreligious issues and build harmony. But what you have with the IRCCs, the word cajoled is really in inverted commas. But what you have is that, there's some kind of, subtle state pressure to get people to this is not just a few people gathering together, but all across our neighborhoods doing that. And that seems to people as being the hand of the state, pushing people together. But I mentioned in my paper, as well as other places where I write about this, people may end up in these platforms because they feel cajoled. But once they're in it, they recognize there's a lot more value to it. And then proper friendships, bonding begin to start off. So there's something about the fact that we've got these policies which have somewhat pressured people to do things which have gone against the normal grain. Really, the normal grain, Prof. 1950s, some people would have got together and decided to talk about harmony. But most people would argue that it's only among those who are a little bit more liberal. People who are conservative about their tradition and faith would prefer to be kept in silos, and the less you meet the other, the better for you. So that I think some of what the policy has done has to shift our thinking, and Singaporeans in general, to be a lot more amenable to the idea that what is the overarching priority in Singapore is really about keeping the kind of harmony we have here intact, and that we recognize is very fragile.
Okay, this is a great juncture. We're about halfway through this panel discussion. It's a great juncture for us to sort of pivot and look forward. We're now in the COVID situation. And I just wanted all the panelists to just talk a little bit about, the factors that make for Singapore's success. How valid are they still, given what we can see might be the makings of a post-COVID world? I mean, for example, fiscal prudence. We are already going into a lot of deficits. Countries all over the world are going into massive debt. And then when it comes to race and religious issues, will there be more xenophobia? What will be the impact of the closing of borders on all this social cohesion in Singapore? Maybe the speakers can just touch on each of these. And there's a question that's related to this from Pauna Tan. She says that based on Harvard Business Review's article, it was mentioned that besides an individual's tangible skill set, there are also intangible elements like emotional quotient or empathy that are more important in being successful. And I just wanted to extend her question when it comes to a society and a country like Singapore. To what extent are our sort of soft skills, harmony, cohesion, and so on? To what extent are those just as important, if not more, than the hardware of infrastructure? Maybe Prof. Koh, you can start.
I think the 50 success stories remain very important. But maybe what I should do next is edit a new book on the 30 challenges of Singapore. I'm serious. What COVID-19 has done is to shine the light on some of our shortcomings. The fact that poverty still exists in this very wealthy country is one. Inequality is another. The plight of the elderly, the single parent, the foreign workers. So COVID-19 has shone the light on some of the problems that we have, but which had not really come up, who have not been highlighted before.
Vikram,
Whose phone is ringing?
I know my phone, just excuse me.
Okay. Okay. Vikram, do you want to say something about the post-COVID world, how you see that changing our fiscal stance or even our economic policies?
Yes, I think we are going to be faced with new challenges. As Tommy pointed out, I mean, for example, inequality. I mean, it is going to be a world of social distancing or semi-social distancing. For a lot of people, social distancing is a luxury. I mean, there are people who have customer-facing jobs. What are they going to do? I think they're going to be at a disadvantage. So I think inequality is in danger of increasing in the post-COVID world. The other issue, as you raised quite rightly, is fiscal sustainability going forward. I mean, we're going to have, we are faced with a sort of record budget deficits, as are all other countries. And I think part of the government's challenge going forward will be to kind of repair the fiscal position. Fortunately, I think there are several options for Singapore to do this. For one thing, when it comes to our GST, we're at 7%, and even if we go to 9%, that will be way below most other countries. The average for the OECD is 19%. So over the medium term, there's a lot of space on the GST side to increase GST and bring in more revenues. Then the government has not borrowed. Singapore has not borrowed. And actually, this is an option. This is a great time to borrow. Interest rates all over the world are zero in any major currency. And I think Singapore might explore this option. If you can borrow at zero interest rates, and Singapore has a AAA rating, so its borrowing cost will probably be rock bottom. I think that's another option. And then, as we discussed earlier, Singapore has very conservative budgeting conventions. We don't include land sales. We include only half of investment returns and so on. So there's space even there. So I think Singapore has options, but it will face challenges related to poverty, to inequality, and on the fiscal side. I just hope we don't try to sort of slash expenditure. I think we should keep expenditure going. Our social programs have to be kept going. Our infrastructure development has to be kept going. These are things that help economic growth and will be necessary for social protection.
Thanks, Vikram. How about you, Mathew? Any observations on what the post-COVID world will be like for racial, social cohesion?
I think just even in this season, you can see not just in Singapore, you have small little bits here and there, but certainly internationally, people are defining the other more and more clearly. We always have this idea about categorizing those who are my group and those who are another group. But this becomes stronger when you're in a crisis. You want to find people you can trust. And sadly, sometimes the lenses that we use are just what is more similar. So skin tone, skin color, physical features, cultural practices. Those are more similar to myself. I expect that they will conform to various kinds of measures. Those are different. I become a little bit more suspicious. And I think this is a concern. You've noticed that over time, you've got different groups picking up different people that we can potentially blame. It's like the typical moral panics. And with COVID's a cultural minefield because cultural markers or cultural identity markers have some way, to whether it's exacerbate the disease. You think about right from the start, people were looking at, they were looking at people to blame. So it was the Chinese because of the exotic food taste. And people said, well, that's probably the reason why the virus started. Now, none of these things have been validated, but people have that kind of stereotype. So, and it's not just a few people, for instance, who might eat very exotic animals. It just becomes then put in a whole culture in the community. And from that, you see, it continues how particular religious groups are then implicated as sources of potential problems. So what you find is you will find more and more of this othering, and certainly people who are not local to this place, and you will look at them as, again, potential individuals who would bring more of a problem. So we can expect that there will be a little bit more of concern, and of course, social distancing. A lot of the value we have placed on good social relations has been to meet people, bond with them, have a friend who is not of the same race, spend time together. Some of these things have been very difficult and been challenged in the COVID season. So I expect that there might be concerns in the weeks and months to come.
Okay. Thanks for that, Mathew. Do you see us sort of dialing down or dialing up our engagement with the outside world, especially when it comes to our foreign worker policy?
With foreign workers, I think again, this is the COVID situation has brought them front and center. I think again, and it is very different to some extent. I think some Singaporeans are going to look at foreign workers, migrant workers as being, we're going to be more and more sympathetic with their plight and be more concerned. But there's others who are increasingly going to feel the pull of xenophobia, feel that, the migrant worker is really the cause. So I think we're going, obviously, I think there's going to be pulls in different. Obviously, there are quarters which are pulling for us to continue. Singapore should continue to be less reliant on foreign labor, migrant work. We should kind of keep ourselves a lot more insular. That's obviously a talk, but I think others are a lot more fair-minded about this.
Mathew, I have a question.
Yes.
Mathew.
Yes, Prof.
I don't see evidence that, apart from the letter writer in Zhao Bao and those who agree with her, I don't see evidence in Singapore of widespread racism or xenophobia. On the contrary, there seems to be an upwelling of sympathy and goodwill towards the foreign workers. Am I right?
Yeah, I think they're Prof, is true. Especially if you're looking at mainstream media, where I think comments are well controlled. It may not be the case if you look at some of the.
Sorry, I should just jump in and correct you there, Mathew. The comments in mainstream media are not well controlled; they are balanced.
All right. Okay. Thank you for that.
Go on. Sorry, I cannot resist that. Go on. Yeah.
Well, great that it's balanced, but you don't find that when it comes to. When people write on social forums and media, what's floating around. Clearly during the seasons where there were concerns, There were concerns about, right at the beginning of the virus, there were concerns raised about the Chinese, and they were quite they were developed, they were spoken by different people, some influential, and you continue to see some of that. Now, it clearly is not as widespread, and I think we are very, very thankful it's not compared to what happens in some other societies, where there's really some kind of witch hunt for particular groups who are seen to be responsible. But we can't run away, Prof. Koh, that the fact that there is some amount of that, and fortunately, because there are enough rules in Singapore, people are concerned, about the law coming after them. They're a little bit more guarded about what they say, and I think that has saved us some problems, especially in an uncertain time like this.
Right? I don't think it's the law.
Respond quickly, Prof, if I may, to your point.
Yeah, Mathew, I don't think it's the law. No.
Yeah.
I think it's not the law. I think Mathew underestimate our own people. I think the great majority of Singaporeans are not racially prejudiced, are not bigoted. And their response to the plight of the foreign worker is one of empathy and goodwill. And I see no evidence that Chinese workers from China working in Singapore are being targeted because the virus originated from Wuhan.
Well,
I agree with Prof on this point. I think, there will always be pockets of, xenophobia, racism, or whatever. But the fact that we have a society where it is increasingly not socially acceptable to voice those opinions, to me, that's a mark of progress. And laws are only one aspect of it. It's also the social pressure that we all exert on people around us to tell them, hey, that's not correct. Yeah. I just wanted to move quickly on, if I may, to gender equality. There's some questions for Dr. Soin in a post-COVID world. From Jess Lee, gender equality is still an issue in a male-dominated industry. Will there be a change post-COVID where transformation is a priority? Basically, could women play a larger role? There's also a concern expressed by one of our Facebook Live viewers about domestic violence and how we can deal with that. Dr. Soin?
Yeah. I will deal with the domestic violence part. There has been a more than 20% increase of calls for help because of domestic violence. And as we were alluding to it earlier, because women are, have overburdened with the care responsibilities, and some of the men may not be used to the care responsibilities at home, and that creates tension. Also, there are about 60,000 families that live in low rental income, 1 or 2 room apartments. And if you have a family of 3 or 4 or even 5 people living in these small apartments, then there's bound to be increased risk of domestic violence. So I think but going back to the earlier discussion, that the post-COVID world is going to show us the inequalities much more. It's going to show up the poverty much more. But can I, Wei Hong, talk about 2 aspects? One is about women's jobs. Many of the women are working in jobs that include services. Just coming to mind, things like hairdressing, manicure, pedicure. Now, with this social distancing, and even massage services, some of these women are going to lose their jobs. And that's going to be more difficult for women. Another thing I want to talk about is health. I think this COVID situation has shown us how important it is to be healthy and having a good immune system. And I think our expenditure on health should be looked at as an investment. I am not against spending for defense, but I think this COVID situation has shown that we should have spare capacity in health as well. It doesn't matter if we have more ventilators, more ICU rooms. And in fact, one F-35 jet fighter could get us 350 ICU rooms. So I think we have accepted spending on defense unquestionably. It's time for us to look at health and spend more and look at it as an investment rather than as an expense. Now, what was your last question, Mui Hong?
Gender equality in companies post-COVID, will there be a greater role for women with transformation?
Well, it will be to some extent, because they realize that you can now work from home, and if you can work from home, then flexible, working hours will become more acceptable. And if that happens, then both the men and the women can decide to work from home, depending whichever it's more convenient. As a medical doctor, it's not so easy, or as a nurse, you cannot work from home. But many other, jobs allow you to work from home. So I think that will help in the equality and opportunities for women if companies take an enlightened view. And also, I think the government probably has to make policies that are more favorable to working from home and taking a family leave rather than just childcare leave, so that you can look after the older people as well as the children.
Thanks for that. Okay, just one moving on to a slightly different tech. Prof. Koh, in your book, among the 50 secrets of Singapore's success that you highlighted, you mentioned Singapore Airlines and the success of Changi Airport, and basically the whole idea of Singapore's connectivity to the world. And I mean, clearly post-COVID, that is going to come under severe pressures and questions. So could I have your comment on how you see that, is that still going to be a strength? Do we have to modify, change it? And maybe Vikram and Mathew and Dr. Soin, of course, can weigh in on this as well.
I think in the short term, there will be a substantial decline in civil aviation, in shipping, but after 1 or 2 years, things will recover. You can't get away from the fact that in a globalized world, you need international aviation and you need international shipping. And for Singapore, we live because we're part of the world. Connectivity is imperative, and we must continue to have Changi Airport as one of the top air hubs of the world. And we want our national carrier, Singapore Airlines, which has been so uniquely profitable, to fly again and make big profits again.
Just a question, how much do you think, the national carrier, to what extent should there be public support for the national carrier, which is actually a commercial company? Should it be, support at all costs, or is there a limit?
Singapore Airlines is not asking for the government to bail them out. They are asking the shareholders to subscribe for more shares and thereby raise additional money for the company. I think that's a wonderful way. And if need be, my bottom line is Singapore Airlines must not fail. And if the manner in which the Singapore Airlines is raising money through selling shares is inadequate, then I support the state intervening.
Vikram?
Well, I agree with Tommy. I mean, I think we're in a temporary situation. This is not going to be a permanent state of affairs. And even already there are new protocols for flying. I mean, Taiwan, I believe, is setting up new protocols for flying, where you have testing, you have wearing masks, you have social distancing even on board. I think they will be able to get over this hump, and I think this will pass and things will return to normal. However, I think there are some aspects of the whole civil aviation business which may need to be relooked. I mean, for example, the emphasis on retail, this things like the jewel and the massive retail revenues that come in. I think these things may change. I mean, I think people's retail habits may change permanently. But flying, as far as the airline itself is concerned, I agree with Tommy. I think Singapore Airlines must survive, and it'll hopefully survive on its own steam. But even if necessary, I would even support subsidies for a temporary period to bring this airline back to life.
I'm sure many of our viewers.
Hoong,
Yes,
I agree with Professor Koh that this is going to be a temporary situation. We will definitely get a vaccine in a year or so, but I would not support the government putting in helping Singapore Airlines because I feel the money needs to be spent at home to lessen inequality for one thing. Second thing is to improve the plight of our foreign workers. As Mathew said, it has brought it full force to us. And I think Singaporeans on the whole are very supportive of foreign workers, but it is time, I think the government did more. With the foreign workers levy, the government has been getting, I think, at least $2 or $3 billion a year. And this money should be spent in giving foreign workers much better accommodation, much better take-home pay, so that we Singaporeans feel proud of the way that we are treating these brothers of ours who are building our city, building our MRT stations, and doing all the kind of work that we are not willing to do ourselves.
I want to reply to Khanna.
Yes.
You seem to suffer from a binary syndrome. I mean, in your mind, it's either A or B. Either buy a F-35 or spend more money on our healthcare, support SIA, or do a better job looking after our foreign workers. I don't have a binary view of life, and I think that we are rich enough that we can do all these things. We can afford the F-35, and we can take better care of our healthcare. We can. I don't think we even need to raise our GST substantially to do all these good things. So my view is that it's not an either or situation. Let us do all these good things that need to be done.
I agree completely with you, Prof. If we can, we must do all. But often we are cast, we are put into a situation, we cannot spend any more on health. We cannot do that. And then that is where the binary sort of attitude arises. But I agree with you. We should be able to spend on all the things that are important for a good quality of life and for us to have good well-being and feel proud of the way that we live our lives.
I think Singapore is very fortunate in that even though we are a country with scarce resources, we also have tremendous abundance, and that is of course thanks to our earlier generations, fiscal prudence and so on, which is one of the factors in this book, 50 Secrets of Singapore's success. I just wanted to highlight one issue that all of you spoke about, which is inequality. I think all of you, mentioned that, and I just wanted to, get your views first, Prof. Koh. When you commissioned the essays for this book, when you started conceptualizing this book, no doubt this is about Singapore's success, but given that there's been so much debate about inequality in Singapore, did that factor in your thinking at all? And moving forward, how do you see us dealing better with that? And I would like all of you to weigh in on the issue of inequality, especially when it comes to socio-economic inequality, poverty, and food poverty, hunger.
You must remember that I edited this book primarily in response to a request from the Mexican student who wanted to know what are the secrets of Singapore's success. And I think that our success stories are not only important to ourselves, but to the rest of the world. The world is hungry for success stories, especially success stories from a small country like Singapore, which doesn't have great mineral or other wealth, So this is my agenda. My agenda is to look at what are the 50 most important success stories of Singapore.
Okay.
Maybe I should do another book, as I said earlier. Maybe I should do a companion book to tell the world that Singapore has been successful. And this is the point I keep making to the Mexican student. We have been successful, but we are not perfect. But they won't believe me, I told them we're not perfect. They said, no, we think you're perfect. One of them even say, for us, Singapore is utopia. And I said, we are not utopia. And I enumerated some of our shortcomings, including inequality, poverty, no minimum wage, etc., etc.
Okay. Vikram, maybe you want to talk a bit about inequality, and then Mathew, and then Dr. Soin.
Sure. We talked about how social distancing is a luxury for a lot of workers. Kalwanjit talked about women being especially on the front lines of this. Working from home is also a luxury for a lot of people. I mean, not everybody can work from home, as we are lucky to be able to do, some of us. But there's one other aspect of working from home that hasn't got enough attention. Working from home means also working from anywhere. So that means hiring from anywhere. I mean, you don't have to, a company does not have to hire somebody in Singapore. I mean, if the job can be done from home, it can hire somebody from anywhere. Now, this is going to impact the labor market. I mean, I think, you could have certain jobs that are done much more cheaply by professionals outside Singapore. So I think this is also going to add to maybe the inequality issue as well. So it's going to affect white collar work. The other aspect of inequality that's important, I think, is regional inequality. I think a lot of the poorer countries around Singapore are going to be much more badly hit, and they have fewer resources, both in terms financially and in terms of health resources, to deal with what's coming. What the COVID crisis. And I think, and I hope that Singapore will step up its support for some of these countries, both financially and through help on medical issues and technology and so on. So I think these are aspects of inequality that are coming down the road at us, and we'll have to deal with them.
Thank you. Mathew?
Yeah, I think inequality, the issue has to be dealt with in a targeted approach. I mean, I think that there are great broad-based policies which are always appealing, but when we look at the Singapore scene, if you look at the last couple of years, there have been a whole range of new initiatives, programs to try to every way possible to deal with those who are caught in the poverty trap, for instance. I mean, preschool is one good example of it. There's been a lot more emphasis on trying to make sure preschool is extremely affordable. It's really like $3 for, really low income folks. So there's all kinds of provision. But somehow there are groups which just are not, for some reason, not able to tap onto some of these provisions. So I think we need to have a better understanding of targeted groups, being able to find what might be the levers for some of them to be able to move up, to be able to better their education, or same goes with food poverty that Hoong mentioned. I mean, there are various agencies which are providing free food. I mean, and I think practically everybody would be able to get it, but somehow or other, there are pockets of Singaporeans who just have lack, even if it comes to basic issues like food, at least at some point of the day or some point of the year. So really getting a better hang on the groups and targeting it, I think that would be very important.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Soin?
Well, I think that to lessen inequality and poverty, we have to further strengthen our social safety nets. And we should not look at it as one of these principles. I hate to use the word sacred cows. We should be able to look at these, our reluctance towards welfareism, because with the global, now globalization is going to slow down for a while, but with inequality arising, we must institute unemployment policies, minimum wage policies, maybe even a universal basic income, less out-of-pocket expenses for health, more preventive care. So I think this gives us now, and even the inequality between men and women, where women do so much of care work, and because of that, they work less in the employment for a wage, and so that it makes their savings less. It reduces their retirement efficacy, so that they have less money for retirement. So I think another thing we should look at is how care work has to be compensated for, so that many women who look after their elderly parents or some other care in the family is not left high and dry in old age with less savings and less retirement.
I just wanted to weigh in on this issue about inequality, something that I feel for and that I've written about many times over the past few years. I mean, my main takeaway in this COVID situation is my sense of shock at how pervasive hunger is in Singapore. And I think, I mean, for a pretty rich, well-organized society, that is something that we must all feel ashamed about. Every day in the papers, you see on the social media and mainstream media, you see so many organizations, so many individuals even organizing to deliver food to the needy. And the fact that these packets of food are welcomed, I mean, from the volunteers that I sometimes speak to, they are welcome and they are needed, just shows really the extent of the need out there. I'm fully aware, of course, that this is partly because we are in a crisis situation, but I understand that even in so-called normal times, there is still this wide big pocket of hunger. I mean, the idea is just appalling. I hope if there's one thing that we really look at and fix, it would be hunger, especially among children. I mean, it's just so heart-wrenching. Okay, we're actually a few minutes past the 1 hour deadline. But thank you all of you for staying on with us. If you'll just stay on with us for about another 5 minutes more, I would just like to ask all the panelists to round up in about 1 minute each. What is one takeaway that you would like the audience to have when it comes to this book, 50 Secrets of Singapore's Success? We think of what can we do? What's the one thing we should do to keep Singapore successful? Prof, you want to start? Oh no, sorry, I wanted you to end actually. Yeah, that's right. Maybe Dr. Soin, you start and then we go around the other way.
I will stick to my subject of empowerment of women. Gender equality and the empowerment of women are fundamental principles that we should unreservedly embrace, especially in a meritocratic society. Not only should we embrace, but we should promote gender equality. Now, but for some skeptics in the audience who feel that they need an economic reason for gender equality, well, I can provide that too, because some work done by McKinsey has shown that advancing women's equality would add $25 billion or 5% to Singapore's GDP by 2025. So what is stopping us to embrace gender equality? There's the moral principle and there is the economic principle. So I say, let's go for it, Singapore, so that by 2025 or the latest 2030, the gender equality should be a secret that's already it's over and done with. And Professor Koh will then exclude it in his next edition.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Mathew?
First, I wanted to say, since we had a little back and forth with Prof. Koh just now about that most Singaporeans are actually very amenable to, I mean, they're not xenophobic, they're not racist. I completely agree with that. I want to state that again. But we do have pockets of Singaporeans, and I think that's where, as a community, because we do believe in it, I think our role is really to stand up against racism, stand up against xenophobia within our own areas of influence, not just looking at what state policy can do, but really what we as individual citizens can do to be able to, showcase the fact that it's important to support the other, despite how other people might categorize them. Also, I think this at this time when we can't run out and make friends with people of other backgrounds, learning something about their cultures, learning to appreciate it better. I think the internet has tons of resources in terms of celebrations. For instance, Ramadan is here, and understanding a little bit more about what our Muslim brothers and sisters do this season will help a lot. Many of the things that we can learn about different communities will dispel some of our fears and better be able to embrace people very different as truly part of our part of Singapore.
Thank you. Prof? Oh, Vikram, sorry.
No, I would, if there's one big takeaway from this discussion, I would choose that we must expand social safety nets, because it is going to be a different world post-COVID. I think work from home is here to stay. It is going to survive COVID. It's going to continue, and that does not suit certain people. I think a certain amount of social distancing may be here to stay. I think the gig economy is going to expand because I think a lot of companies are not going to want to have big permanent payrolls, especially when they have much more flexibility in being able to hire part-time workers. I think a lot of people are going to have income insecurity and job insecurity. I think also manufacturing and all that is going to change. There's going to be more low-touch manufacturing. There's going to be more technology. There's going to be more 3D printing and so on. I think, and that is going to affect jobs in the manufacturing sector. So I think you have workers in different fields, including white-collar workers, who will be affected by income insecurity and job insecurity. So I think Singapore will have to look at new kind of social protections. Some economists, including MP Walter Teixeira, has proposed temporary universal basic income. I think that should be on the table for discussion. I think Hoong, you wrote an article long ago, and I've also written about it, that it should be up there for discussion. So we have to examine new social protections to take care of all the different types of insecurities that are going to come in the post-COVID world.
Thanks, Vikram. Prof.
Let me conclude by saying that Singapore is a very successful country, and we should be proud of these 50 success stories in my book. However, we should not become complacent or arrogant. We must remain humble. And as I explained to the Mexican student, Singapore is not utopian. It is not perfect. There are still areas in which we can make Singapore better. So maybe as a result of this discussion, I will think seriously about editing a new book on making utopia better.
Making Singapore better. Okay. On this note, I just want to round up this panel discussion, and of course to flag all of you to rush out now online to stbooks.sg. We can buy this book at a discounted price. Yes, it's edited by Professor Tommy Koh. 50 essays on the factors that make for Singapore's success. Yeah. Thanks very much, everybody, for the discussion. I think you've given us much food for thought. I particularly liked the way the discussion pivoted beyond what has made Singapore successful to what can keep us remaining successful, especially in this COVID era. All right. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. And I hope you'll join us for future such events. Bye-bye.